Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really zeroing in on Singapore, specifically their big push to become, well, a major hub for carbon services.
Yeah, it's quite ambitious. We've been looking at the latest reports, right, from the Straits Times.
Exactly, covering the Gen Zero Climate Summit Insights just yesterday, May 5th. And our mission, really, is to understand how Singapore plans to carve out this space in carbon trading.
Especially now, yeah, with the global economy being, let's say, a bit wobbly.
Right, you've got the U.S. tariffs, geopolitical stuff happening all over.
And the global carbon markets themselves seem to be stalling a bit. Lack of common standards, funding issues.
Talent gaps, too, I hear.
Definitely. And that's what makes Singapore's strategy so interesting, you know. They're actively pushing forward despite all that uncertainty.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because it does seem like while the global picture is murky, Singapore is, well, doubling down.
They really are. Investing money, developing people.
Yeah, our sources point to three main things: more funding, specific talent development schemes, and a focus on particular kinds of carbon projects and credits.
Let's start with the money then. So at that Gen Zero Summit, Minister Tan See Leng made some key announcements.
The Manpower Minister and Second Minister for Trade and Industry.
That's the one. The Economic Development Board, the EDB, they've put another $20 million into their carbon project development grant.
Okay, $20 million. What's that grant actually for? Who benefits?
Well, the main idea is to help local companies right at the start. You know, the really early, tricky stages of developing these high-quality carbon projects.
Like feasibility studies, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Feasibility studies, trying to lock in buyers for the credits long-term. These parts often struggle to get funding, so the grant aims to fill that gap.
And this $20 million is not just standard government money, is it? I read something about a different source.
Yeah, that's quite innovative, actually. It's coming through a new donor-advised fund.
Oh.
It's a joint thing between the EDB and Temasek Trust's philanthropy arm. The idea is to pull in money from family offices, from foundations.
Tapping into private philanthropic capital for climate action. Interesting.
Very. It's a way to blend public strategy with private funding.
And do we know who's getting the first slice of this?
We do. They announced the first three recipients. It's 3 Degrees, Climate Bridge International, and the Nature Conservancy.
Quite a mix there. Project developers and environmental NGO.
Right. They didn't say exactly how much each gets, but it shows they're supporting different kinds of initiatives.
Now, Dr. Tan at the summit, he talked about financing being a major hurdle for carbon markets globally. How does this grant fit into solving that from his perspective?
Well, his point was basically that this lack of finance is a real bottleneck. Developers face big upfront costs for, designing the projects, doing the initial work.
And investors might be hesitant without seeing a clear path forward.
Exactly. So grants like this and philanthropic money, they can help de-risk those early stages, make the projects look a bit more attractive to other investors later on.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's shift gears a bit to the actual projects and credits. The sources mention two main types.
That's right. You've got your nature-based credits, think restoring forests, conservation efforts, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then you have technological credits. So projects using cleaner tech, like distributing cleaner cook stoves to replace older, polluting ones.
And Singapore itself plans to use these credits for its own climate goals, right, under the Paris Agreement.
Yes, the estimate is they'll use high-quality credits to offset about 2.5 million tons of emissions per year, running from 2021 up to 2030.
But there's a catch, isn't there, about where the credits come from?
A very important one. If Singapore wants to use these credits to count towards its national targets, they must come from countries where Singapore has a formal bilateral agreement.
A specific pact for carbon credit trading.
Precisely. And the report notes that, as of now, Singapore hasn't actually bought any credits for that specific purpose yet.
Good distinction. Now, one of those grant recipients, Climate Bridge International, what's their focus?
They're looking at a mix. Nature projects, definitely, but also low-carbon transport initiatives and methane capture.
Methane capture, that's important, given how potent methane is as a greenhouse gas.
Absolutely. And Climate Bridge International itself is fairly new, a joint venture with China's Climate Bridge, launched just back in April.
And the EDB grant helps them how? Hiring, studies.
Both, it seems. It'll help them hire local staff in Singapore and also speed up those crucial feasibility studies for their projects.
And are they focusing their projects in specific countries?
Yes, and it aligns very logically with Singapore's strategy. They're targeting countries that either already have or are developing carbon trading pacts with Singapore.
Like who?
The article mentioned Ghana, Bhutan, Laos, and Malaysia specifically. It makes sense to focus there to soothe the path for credit transfer later.
Right, aligning the project development with the policy framework. Smart. Okay, let's talk talent. That's the other big piece here. Singapore sees this sector as a growth engine.
A key one, yeah. The growth is actually quite stark. Over 150 firms in the carbon services space this year.
Wow. And that's up from...
Double the number from just 2021. So really rapid growth.
And what kinds of firms are these?
It's a whole ecosystem.
Yeah.
You've got low carbon advisors, the project developers themselves, traders, carbon exchanges.
Plus the verification side, monitoring emissions.
Exactly. Monitoring, reporting, verification, the MRV firms, and even international climate organizations setting up shop there.
So to fuel this, you need people. What are they doing on the talent development front? It can't just be funding.
No, definitely not. They're being very deliberate about building the workforce. For instance, the National University of Singapore, NUS, is launching a new professional certificate just for carbon services and trading.
Okay, specific training.
And Nanyang Technological University, NTU, they already have a carbon markets academy. It's like a 9-day intensive program.
And there's something about a national framework.
Yes. Skills Future Singapore put out a framework. It basically maps out the jobs, the career paths, and crucially, the skills needed in this sector.
So universities and training providers can use that to design their courses.
Precisely. It guides the whole training ecosystem.
And this links back to what Dr. Tan said about global talent shortages being a drag on carbon markets.
It does. Singapore seems to be thinking, okay, if there's a global shortage, we need to build our own strong pool of experts right here.
And we see companies already hiring locally.
Yeah, the Climate Bridge International example, again, they've hired 2 Singaporean project specialists already, and they plan to hire more by year-end. It's happening.
Okay, so you've got funding, you've got talent initiatives. What's the expected payoff, the economic opportunity here, and what are the risks?
Well, there was an earlier study looking at the potential economic impact. It projected the gross value add for Singapore's carbon hub could be anywhere from US $1.8 billion up to US $5.6 billion.
That's quite a range, but even the lower end is significant.
Absolutely. That potential payoff is a big reason for all this effort. Plus, Singapore was involved in carbon trading early on under the UN system, which probably helps attract companies.
And just the general push towards sustainability helps too, presumably.
For sure. EDB and Enterprise Singapore see the whole green economy as a major growth area driven by that urgent need to tackle climate change.
But going back to the global wobbles, what about things like trade wars? Could that derail things?
That's a valid concern. Mr. Alvin Lim from Climate Bridge mentioned this. A really prolonged trade war could push countries towards, deglobalization.
Focusing inward, maybe less on international climate investments.
Potentially. A shift away from investments focused purely on emission cuts might happen if economic nationalism really takes hold.
And what about just general economic downturns? Do companies put sustainability on the back burner when times get tough?
Mr. Izzat Hamzat from 3 Degrees touched on that. He suggested that, during downturns, companies might naturally focus more on immediate things like cutting costs, keeping operations running smoothly.
So sustainability might slip down the priority list.
It could, but he also made the point that companies with strong public commitments to green goals are likely to stick with them. They might become more careful about how they spend on sustainability, but the core objectives often remain.
That's an important nuance. And despite these potential headwinds, activity is continuing elsewhere, right? Europe, China.
Yes. Mr. Lim pointed that out too. Europe, China, even within ASEAN, there's still ongoing work in carbon markets. So it's not like the whole thing is grinding to a halt globally.
There's still underlying momentum, even with challenges.
Exactly. The basic need to decarbonize isn't vanishing.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together. What's the big picture here, the main takeaway from Singapore's approach?
I think it's how comprehensive it is. It's not just one thing. They're combining the funding to smooth out early risks,
Right.
the talent development to make sure they have the skilled people, and also building those strategic international partnerships for the actual credit deals. It's really multi-layered.
And the real aha moment for me, perhaps, is that they seem to be directly tackling the things holding back the global market.
Yes, by building their own sort of robust, well-defined ecosystem locally?
They're not just waiting for everyone else to figure it out. They're trying to build a working model themselves, potentially positioning themselves as a real leader, even with all the global noise.
That's a great way to put it. It's a very proactive, localized strategy to overcome those broader market challenges.
So for you listening, why does this matter? Well, understanding Singapore's playbook here gives you real insight into how climate action is evolving.
And it highlights just how important carbon markets are becoming economically. This could affect business decisions, maybe even your career path.
Or just your general understanding of how the world is trying or struggling to deal with sustainability.
Which leads us with a thought to chew on. Singapore is taking this very proactive route. What other kinds of innovative solutions might pop up globally to get past the current roadblocks in carbon markets?
Yeah, and how could those different approaches affect international cooperation on climate change down the line? It's clearly complex.
It is. But Singapore's efforts, they definitely offered a fascinating glimpse into how one nation is trying to forge ahead, even when the global path isn't perfectly clear.